President Trump hosting a historic meeting at the White House, bringing together Ukrainian President Zelenskyy and 7 European leaders, all to discuss bringing an end to Russia's war on Kyiv. The president saying they discussed security guarantees for Ukraine and what would be provided by European countries. He's also working to facilitate a face-to-face meeting between Vladimir Putin and Zelenskyy, with a trilateral meeting between himself and the two leaders after. Here's the president breaking it all down.
We're going to try and work out a trilat after that and see if we can get it finished, put this to sleep, because this is not since the Second World War has there been anything like this. President Putin agreed that Russia would accept security guarantees for Ukraine, and this is one of the key points that we need to consider. I'm optimistic that collectively we can reach an agreement that would deter any future aggression against Ukraine. I think that the European nations are going to take a lot of the burden. We're going to help them, and we're going to make it very secure. Ultimately, this is a decision that can only be made by President Zelenskyy and by the people of Ukraine, working also together in agreement with President Putin. And I just think that's very good things are going to come of it. And I think you'll see that President Putin really would like to do something else.
Joining me now, U.S. Ambassador to NATO Matthew Whitaker. Ambassador, your reaction this morning to what you witnessed yesterday in the East Room of the White House?
Well, not only was it historic, but I think we had a moment where we took the next logical and good step towards peace. And that is a reason to celebrate this morning. You know, it is not going to be easy. I mean, we all wanted the war to end 3.5 years ago. We all wanted the war to end on Friday when President Trump had his historic meeting in Alaska with President Putin. Certainly yesterday would have been great to have the war end, but it's not going to be easy because this is a difficult slog, meat grinder style World War I type war. And it's going to be hard to end, but I think we're taking the right steps. And, you know, obviously you heard from all of those leaders, you know, all of the European heads of state that are members of NATO compliment President Trump, and they're right. There is nobody else that could bring both sides, the Ukrainians and the Russians, to the table. President Trump has done that, deserves a lot of credit, and at the same time, he's continuing the path towards peace, and that's exciting. Well,
and Politico calling yesterday's summit at the White House, if you will, a game changer in the war. My question to you is, what do you think that Putin is going to be willing to accept? And that is the question mark. You mentioned the security guarantees, obviously the NATO role in this. I mean, they have agreed to up their defense spending. It's about time, I would say. But now it's going to be up to the Europeans to really have that role be crystal clear. What does that say to you? Does that say troops on the ground in Ukraine? Is that the security part of this? And also, do you think that the U.S. would eventually maybe donate weapons? Would the U.S. eventually maybe put troops in place? I mean, where do you foresee that all going?
Yeah, Cheryl, I think that's a great question. Ultimately, the American people have already given over $300 billion to Ukraine to support its economy, to support its war efforts. You know, we are now have this mechanism that I'm helping coordinate where American arms and ammunition are being sold to our European NATO allies, plus Canada, and those are being provided to Ukraine. And we've so far we've completed billions of dollars of those transactions. It does not make America any less strategically strong, but it does help Ukraine defend itself. And so that was an important step. I think that's one of the reasons that Vladimir Putin's at the table. You know, the security guarantees, those were the topic yesterday. What each country was willing to do and provide. Certainly European troops in Ukraine, ultimately after the war ends and we have a peace deal, is on the table. President Trump has said that the United States will be part of that coalition, but at the same time, he has not committed to American troops being there. But there are certain capabilities, especially on the command and control and other capabilities that only the United States of America can provide. It's why most countries in the world want to be our ally. And among other things, being the largest economy and the strongest, most powerful military are a couple other reasons. But certainly the coalition of the willing and the security guarantees are crucial for Ukraine. And at the same time, Putin conceding that on Friday, I think, was a big step towards peace.
And according to some reports in Russian state media this morning, Yuri Yushchykov, he's a Kremlin aide, talked about the fact that Putin thanked President Trump for the phone call, the summit that happened on Friday in Alaska, but that also that Putin says, yes, I'm in favor of further talks. So that's according to Russian state media. At the same time, talk to me about your role in all of this, Matthew, because as you move forward with your role in NATO now, under this, they're calling it the coalition of the willing, and this is something that's going to be led by Secretary of State Rubio, as now the devil is in the details, as you know. Talk to us about what your role is going to be and how you foresee this playing out, and also the timing in all of these talks.
Well, my role is to continue to be the ambassador to NATO, and that involves making sure that European allies, together with Canada, are strong and more lethal than they've ever been, and make sure that the spending that we're seeing them execute over the next decade goes to actual defense and deterrence and actual strength, because that strength is what's going to secure the peace. If NATO's involved in any meaningful way in a peace deal, certainly I would guess the president and the Secretary of State would ask for me to be involved. But, I am in Europe most days. That's where I'm based. And so I'm able to interface a lot with our European allies as well. So I'll continue to help coordinate the arms sales and movement to Ukraine, and at the same time stand by and we'll continue to work on peace where I can be helpful.
Well, and to further that conversation, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte did speak last night with Fox's Laura Ingraham, and here are his takeaways. Watch this.
What we are discussing here is not NATO membership. What we are discussing here is Article 5 type of security guarantees for Ukraine and what they exactly will entail. His criticism of NATO was right. What he was saying is that the US is spending so much more on its defense and therefore spending on the collective defense of NATO territory than the Europeans. And I hope the Americans see this. Probably one of his biggest foreign policy successes of his president, of Trump 47, is that during the NATO summit, we committed collectively to this 5% spending. He always said that he supported NATO, but he also expected the Europeans to pay up, to spend more. He has been successful in doing this. And without President Trump, this deadlock with Putin would not have been broken. He was the only one who could do that, starting in February.
And Ambassador, that is the question still. Can we commit, do we know, and can we believe that our European partners are going to actually honor their pledge to continue spending and supporting this war in Ukraine?
Yeah, Cheryl. Well, the good news is that our European allies are already spending. We have countries like Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, where I'll be next week, where they are already at 5%, or they're going to be there next year. You're seeing big countries like Germany that are really ramping up their military spending and are on a pathway to dramatically increase their military spending. And so I think this is a different time. Certainly the pacing threat for our European allies is Russia, is Vladimir Putin, and they are taking that very seriously. I worked very hard, and I work every day with Secretary General Rutte. We have a great constructive relationship, and the effort to get to the 5% at The Hague that we saw a couple months ago obviously sets the table for a coalition of the willing, a security guarantee that's credible, and that ultimately, hopefully, will secure the peace. Because remember, we have a World War I type land war right now going on the European continent. Nobody ever thought this would happen, but here it is. And President Trump, thankfully, was elected last November and has brought us to a position of getting a peace deal where we are possibly a couple meetings away from having the killing end, because tens of thousands of people are dying every month on the battlefield and in the cities in Ukraine. It's awful. And so we got to end the war. President Trump has brought the parties to the table. He's the only person who can do it. Yeah. And let's pray for peace.
World War I style with drone technology. Ambassador Matthew Whitaker, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Good to see you, Cheryl.
All right. We'll be right back, everybody.